Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to this event. The event is shared by the NDC Aspects Project and the BC3 as a partner of the project and the UNRED program. Particularly supported by FAO, which we really are very, very pleased to have them here as well. The objectives of the event is to stimulate discussion across different initiatives and countries that have been working for very long on the RED Plus arena, which is a very fundamental part of the Folu sector as a whole. And we want to move from what it was, when it was created, for what purpose, and how it was created, and how this can be translated to the new paradigm of the Paris Agreement. So for that we have several speakers. We are still waiting for two, but we will start at now. And I will introduce them at the beginning, and the two that are coming later on when they are here. But we have today the pleasure to have Amy Duchel from FAO. She's a senior forestry officer and team leader of the Forest and Climate Change unit in the Forestry Division. She's been in C4 for so long. We met indeed when she was in C4 and worked together a long time ago. And she's been doing a very intensive and good analysis on RED Plus different aspects for many, many years. We also have Dirk Nemitz. He's from the UNFCCC Secretariat. Dirk is the team lead of the Folu in the Secretariat, and he leads with Agriculture, Forestry and Land Use unit. And he has over 10 years of experience at the UNFCCC, facilitating from the point of view of the Secretariat all these discussions. He knows very well how RED was launched and how it's been evolving. We also have Johannes Svensson. He is from IDRI. Johannes works on the development of low greenhouse gas development pathways in agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector, within a program which is called Deep Decarbonization Pathways, which is an initiative of his institute. And we also have here Sebastian Carranza, which is the climate. Well, Sebastian has been substituted by Carlos. Luis. So maybe, Carlos, you can say a few words on yourself.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm Luis Guerra from the Directorate of Climate Change and Risk Management. I am a specialist in adaptation and also involved in some RED Plus approaches for our country.
Mm-hmm. And we also have the pleasure to, in the last minute, count with Indonesia here. We have Frankie Samsani, and he's the Deputy Director for Mitigation Action in the DGCC, in the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And well, I don't need to say anything about him because he's dealing with all the difficult issues in the ministry probably. And then he will join us Mireia Atayat, and she's the head of Nature for Climate Branch in UNEP. Mireille was also for a while in the UN RED program at UNDP, and she also has been working in the CAFI initiative in Central Africa, in DRC for some years, and now is in the UNEP. And finally, we will count with Dr. Bapon Fakhrudin. He's from in the Green Climate Fund. Unfortunately, our colleague that is dealing with forestry is not anymore. He left already, but we count with a vision of the Green Climate Fund. He's an expert on water and climate change adaptation projects. I think it's important to have someone from adaptation here because also these, the impacts of climate change are emerging as one important key issue when you deal with forest in the context of mitigation. So this is the panel we have today. And I will do a very short introduction of some issues that when we were designing the panel, we thought they were important, and that's the reason why we are here today. Well, in the first point, what I want to make is that the regime it was conceived as a simple, fit-for-purpose regime, as an instrument to provide flexibility for countries to address the multiple complexities and specificities of drivers of deforestation and forest degradation, and of course the other activities. And when you conceive the RED activities, what you see is that basically is everything you can do in forest. So in essence, covers, if you cover all the activities, the full forest sector. And the point is that unlike other problems, for example, something which is very important here those days, like the energy transition, addressing deforestation has much greater complexity. And attached to the complexity, there is a lot of uncertainty. But the sector is not less important than other sectors. Indeed, it may become more important because we are relying on the sector for supplying the gap, which will be in 2050 on emissions that won't be possible to avoid, and that is an important role by 2050. However, I mean, on RED Plus mechanism, regime, whatever you want to call it, what we ended up with is mixed results, where countries have been gradually adapting to the increasingly strict requirements that are being put in the different initiatives, but the finance volumes that were promised at the end of the pipe remain insufficient. Sometimes inadequate because they focus on some parts of the RED Plus sort of cycle, and of course there are also some predictable. Another issue that we want to point out is that the added stringency of the results, because we were focusing on results-based payments, even with the idea of moving into markets, distracted the focus on the implementation of actions that were needed to indeed produce the results that we were expecting, also in terms of finance. And also, we also distracted the attention from the fact that we need a greater integration between the Folu sector, the forest sector, other land use, and the agriculture sector, because most of the drivers are on the agriculture sector. In addition to that, we have emerging trade-related measures that are triggering a deeper reflection on how RED can interact with these processes and potentially evolve in this context. And then, of course, we have the issue that most of the efforts on capacity building and resources are being focused on monitoring the measurements in order to measure the commodity at the expense of later or less emphasis on actions to conserve and the environmental services that forests are providing. So countries indeed are now, some countries, and I'm pretty sure we will see that, now turning into understanding a more holistic approach to conserve, to produce, or to catalyze mitigation, but at the same time that other services, including adaptation, biodiversity, water, and so on. So the opportunity that we have today is to reflect differently on the value of forests, moving away from a single commoditization approach towards a role of supportive elements that the forests are in the sense of how nature provides services. I mean, Dirk, you were in the times where RED was first conceptualized, and the world was different than today. It was different than this COP. So if RED is adequately linked to the Paris architecture to make it conceive it to higher ambition in actions, I mean, how we will do that? Is there a need to strengthen change with things, or maybe explain RED Plus in different ways? Do we have the enough elements? Do we need to do something?
Thank you very much for having me here. I think it's worthwhile to go back and look at 10 years ago where we were and what RED actually is. And to me, it's an agreed framework that if you follow it, there should be compensation for that. First, for readiness, for building up the institutions, and later for the results you're getting. And at the time in Warsaw 2013, I remember the headlines, it was a major breakthrough, and I don't think any other items ever had 7 decisions in one COP that worked together, agreed. And it was a tremendous work by the negotiators to make that happen. And a tremendous proof of what they want to achieve, and that there's a common goal, and that forces around the world understand what is needed. Not always agreeing on the details, or only after very hard, long nights agreeing on the details, but agreeing in the end. And if we go back to Paris, which is already also 8 years ago, Paris avoided making any major changes to any of the MRV systems that we have that were running and were up and running. This is true for the conventional systems for reporting and reviewing greenhouse gas inventory data, and it's also for RED+. And it all continues to be guided by the IPCC. There's no new elements there. And it preserves the existing systems under one single umbrella. And why is that important? It's important because it gives the necessary certainty that the systems and the institutions that countries have built over decades remain to be relevant. RED at this point was 5, 7, 8 years in for many countries. Greenhouse gas inventories, many countries have started with that, also developing countries, also 15 years ago. They just didn't have the same reporting requirements and stringency and the same capacity to build this up. But the idea is really to keep this ongoing and valid and provide certainty of what to expect and what is expected from the countries. And that was also a reason why it was possible for countries, for developing countries, but also for developed countries to agree on putting together NDCs, nationally determined contributions, because they knew how would this be measured and how would we show towards tracking progress and showing that we are doing what we should be doing. RED+ over the last decade and a half has resulted in capacity building for many, many things, for the monitoring of forests, but also for building stakeholder engagements in many countries, for the institutional arrangements, for the cross-ministerial and cross-institutional discussions that are necessary to make this work, as Maria said before. It can't be done by the forest sector alone. And given the requirement that RED has to be consistent with the greenhouse gas inventory, it also built capacity towards the greenhouse gas inventories in the country. And not only for forests, but also for other sectors. This was a spillover to, if we improve in forests, then other sectors also are getting better data, better reporting, and are improving. And I know from some countries that this was even the driver behind even submitting the first BOR, the first biennial update report, was that this was needed to submit the RED+ annex. There was no other incentive really to submit the first BOR. Now the question of whether RED remains relevant for the Paris Agreement is interesting because given that this was actually incorporated as a whole framework unchanged in Article 5.2 of the Paris Agreement at treaty level. So that means there's really no substantive change. Instead of putting your technical annex to the BOR, in the future it will be the BTR. But all the provisions in the Warsaw Framework stay the same and valid. This is a major chance, I think, for RED to be relevant once again as a driver for BTRs and overall for enhanced quality of the greenhouse gas reporting and continuity of the institutions that are maintaining the data and reporting the data and being in contact for the review of the data. And to me, all of this is the foundation for higher ambition. You can talk about ambition all you want. If you can't measure it, if you don't have the foundation to work on it, to show it at the national level what is happening, then it's not really happening. That's really, I don't see a need for changing the system. I think it would be disruptive to changing the system that was built, but there's a need for much better communication. We need to use what we have and also use it better. We have to clarify the importance and advantages of national level RED+, linking to the overall greenhouse gas reporting and the overall mitigation ambition, and including all the fundamental institutional linkages that are described before. More finance is needed, definitely. All sources of finance are recognized in RED+. And we're seeing now a diversity of finance, which is both welcome, but is also a challenge for countries. And it's also a challenge for other stakeholders and for donors. I think it's therefore important that once countries are starting to receive results-based payments, it is important that this is tracked somewhere. And that need was seen already at the COP in Lima in 2014, where countries launched the Lima Info Hub, where all of the results-based payments can be put in. And you can see what is the country receiving and who are the main actors helping the country to implement RED+ at scale. Linking this to NDCs, linking it to the global stocktake, and linking it to an aggregation that can be done globally to see where we stand. So to me, the info hub is of key importance to keep an overview of all of the important activities that are happening right now. And I hope that the info hub will get many, many more entries, helping countries to get to where we need to be to stop deforestation by 2030.
Yeah, thank you, Dirk. It's important. Now we got a lesson of what REDD+ is. I think it is quite important. REDD+ was an unprecedented piece of governance, of multilateral governance, which triggered a lot of work and a lot of, also a lot of capacity building, which was fundamental and it still remains fundamental. But Mireille, let's move to the governance. The forest governance internationally is quite complex. And REDD+ was just landing there, perhaps without really integrating into global governance of forests. So, I mean, how do you think that the actual circumstances we have can help to really do what we didn't do at the beginning? So make REDD in the center of the global governance, but integrated with other aspects of the forest global governance.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you for the invitation. And sorry for being late. I think I can't walk anymore after this. That's my last event, and that's it. I think maybe we need to go back a little bit into the history of global forest governance to start with. And, well, I wasn't there, but I do recall, I was a student at the time, but I do recall that coming out of Rio was a major disappointment that there was not a convention on forests at the time. And I think that that's because of the multiple dimensions and multiple values and multiple aspects of forests, whether it's forest for fuel, forest for building, forest for well, now for carbon is a new layer that's been added, but forest for habitat, for housing, for non-timber forest products, and so on. And there's always been that uncertainty, if I can say, about what are forests and what's their role. And so now we have the UN framework on forests that has a series of global forest goals that have been agreed among countries, among its member states, that go beyond carbon and beyond timber as well. Even though ITTO is a member of and a supporter of the UNFF, we have a voluntary group with a collaborative partnership on forests. We have a voluntary group of international organizations that cover the full spectrum of research to investments to timber production and other aspects as well, local community and local use. And so, and then we've got FAO, of course, that's got a number of streams working on wood and timber and forests and forest products and non-timber forest products and so on. So I think that this actually represents the diversity of forests around the world and the diversity of what forests have to offer. So I do see that the UNFCCC framework and the next round of NDCs is probably an opportunity to start reflecting around all of this and to start reflecting all of that. If you'll allow me, I will share a little bit of a few perspectives, maybe scaling from country level to regional and then to global level in that sense. From my own experience supporting countries with their REDD frameworks and then with implementing REDD investments, I have to contradict you, Dirk. I actually think that because of the prospect and the perspective of money is going to come one day, REDD has actually stirred competition at the country level. Competition between ministries of agriculture and environment, between ministries of environment and finance, who all of a sudden wanted to manage the process, among communities as well, on I'm the one that's preserving more, or no, you're not the one, we are the ones. And so actually it has stirred some competition. It's not been as ideal as you've portrayed it. That being said, it has created a lot of capacities in terms of understanding forests better, doing all the national forest inventories, the national forest monitoring systems. The bémol, as they would say in French, like the hiccup, has been that rather than acknowledging and recognizing that this actually is a decision support tool and system for national decision-making systems, these tools and instruments have been seen as a little bit like you said for the BURs and the BTRs, as this is what will enable me to get the funding that I need, and therefore I'm going to do it as a tick-the-box kind of process. This round of NDCs coming up for me is a huge opportunity to change that and to start using all the tools and instruments at country level that have been developed for the purpose of RED and results-based payments ultimately, to drive the discussion and conversation around what are the trade-offs. Maria mentioned it, agriculture is the main driver of deforestation around the world. But is it agriculture for the purpose of generating foreign direct investments and foreign currency coming into the country and reinvesting this into something else? Or is it agriculture for purposes of food security? Or is it So understanding what the dimensions are and what the benefit of that deforestation is for and what can it substitute for. And then that would take us to the next level of, and Maria, please interrupt me if I'm over time. And then I think that takes us a little bit to the next level of maybe what can change and what can improve. We have seen a first cycle of results-based payments with, whether it's bilateral, jurisdictional, all of these different platforms that have taken place. So maybe one of the questions that we can ask ourselves is that the conditionality in terms of use of proceeds, does it really match when we're analyzing those trade-offs between why is forest being destroyed or removed? Then what can the proceeds from results-based payment be used for that will actually incentivize countries in order to maintain those forests or substitute or provide for a need that they have that was being fulfilled by deforestation? And then, so that would imply, of course, that there would be a reflection around safeguards. I don't know of any other sector or any other financial streams that have been as much subject to scrutiny, integrity, transparency, safeguards as RED has been. You take the mining sector. I was very closely involved with ETIE. It comes nowhere near to the level of scrutiny, integrity, and safeguards that we have in the forest sector. So could we potentially, in the next round of NDCs, in order to incentivize forest protection, could we, for example, think about or reducing deforestation or sustainable management of forests, could we think about a sliding scale of payments per ton that would go with a gradient of safeguards that can one day reach what is being requested by carbon markets or by results-based payments in general, but then would reward countries for a gradual effort that will leave no one behind on one hand and will help emulate or stir up towards that higher standard on the other hand. And lastly, one thing that is very close to my heart, I think that this would go a very, very long way in helping address the difficulty that we have between the long-term economic savings from maintaining forests versus the short-term financial dividends coming into national treasuries and public accounting. And here, maybe national, integrating nature into public accounting is one of the ways through which we can do it as countries are also starting enhancing the taxonomy of their financial systems and looking into natural capital accounting. Thanks.
Yeah, that's interesting because that flows into our next speaker. We didn't arrive. Indeed, there have been very intense discussions in the context of the GCF results-based payments pilot for RED+. In the first one and in the second one, which was discussed for the last 1 year. And it is quite interesting because you said we use the proceeds, right? And the point is that it is going to be very difficult to raise the price or to have the price attached to the stringency at this point in time. But what we've been discussing is this idea that the donors have, that if you do transformational projects of the GCF in the same place that you received the results-based payment, this is double payment. And I don't think that's the case. You know, the payments with this low price, indeed, is a recognition that you did it well. And of course, in the window that was already finalized, it was a requirement to reinvest. But this reinvestment is not enough. So you need to ensure that there are some other sources of finance to really transform the sector in the country. So that is a very interesting point. But I concur with you that in the future, it will be ideal that we will be able to modulate the price and other sources in this context. And I agree also that one way to internalize, to align with the domestic investments is basically to have nature and budget being there. So natural capital accounts is one way to do that. And as you know, you may know all, there is an initiative by the UN to support countries on doing their national capital accounts now. So I think this is also coming in. And it's quite interesting to see that institutions which I think are quite relevant on giving the signals, like the International Monetary Fund, are also connected to that. So this is by itself a discussion, but thanks, Mireille. I mean, we brought here the GCF precisely because it's been this pilot of $500 million that was already finished, where countries were really accessing funding for results-based payments at the level that other initiatives that have been there for many years were not able to disclose. And the reason for that was because it was aligned with the Warsaw Framework, and it was results-based payments with no connection to markets. So the carbon was owned by the country at the end. But of course, it were for periods that were prior to the Paris Agreement. So in a way, it was a testing and a way to demonstrate that the RED+ framework was able to work. And the GCF was mandated to support that. So now, let's move to our next speaker, which is Amy. I mean, Amy, you have been for many years engaged on lots of things beyond forest. So we've been talking about agriculture here, and I think what I want to ask you is, we have incentives coming all over the place, not only for the forest sector, and agriculture is there as well. And agriculture in some countries is fundamental, as Mireille said, is about which agriculture we're talking about. It's also very, very important. So my question is, what do these developments mean for the RED+? I mean, what is developments in the side, in the margins, no? In the project, we map the agriculture governance as well. And it's quite interesting to see that the agriculture support and governance remains on the margins of the formal multilateral processes. So that doesn't get into the core. And forest is just in the center, right? So, I mean, should RED evolve and blend with these new initiatives, and how they will coexist, or they should remain separate, and how they will play together in the context of the UNFCCC?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. Maria Jose, it's great to be here. I should recognize, I mean, you've done a lot of work with FAO, and it hasn't been directly with me, so I do want to recognize especially Jose Carlos Fernandez, who we were hoping would be here and couldn't come, Lucio Santos and Serena Fortuna, who really have been in these discussions. And I've exchanged a lot with Jose Carlos, especially over the past days, so I'm sort of mixing his ideas and mine in my response. So.
Jose Carlos was supposed to be the moderator.
He was supposed to be here, and maybe he's online, so Jose Carlos, if I say something strange, sorry, we will we will resolve it later together. But I think, you know, the whole rationale of REDD+ was really to make standing forests have more value standing than cleared. And I will never forget that, I think this was in 2010, and this is before my FAO time. I was still working at C4, and I was in Coty Iguaçu, a municipality in the northwest of Mato Grosso state in Brazil, and we were doing research there with C4, and a week before we were there, Blairo Maggi, who was the former governor of Mato Grosso, also known as the Soybean King, a pretty famous character, had been there and had a meeting with big farmers and big loggers and the real big producers, and said, keep your forest standing, there's going to be money for this. And we came a week later and we're hearing this, and I was thinking, wow, I mean, this is powerful. Imagine, you know, the Soybean King sending that message to large producers. And that money never materialized. And that has been a serious problem for the legitimacy of the whole thing, in fact. And the building on what Maria is saying, I mean, what hasn't happened is the multiple values of forests, that everything that forests provide has never been valued. It's a serious market failure that has not yet been resolved. And, you know, since I got to FAO about 2 years ago, I mean, it's very clear to me. I mean, yes, I mean, the NDCs, we have an amazing potential to bring the sectors together in something very holistic. You know, this is harder. This is harder than we think. I mean, I'm in the forestry division, and I have my colleagues in the livestock division and the plant protection division, and you know, and we do speak different languages. We have different stakeholders. We have different communities, and this is sort of reflected at the international level, what's happening at the national level. And so something that I've become extremely interested in, and let's say passionate about, is how do we show how important forests are for agricultural productivity? And how can we show how important forests are for food security and water security? And I mean, there's some just amazing numbers. We've been working with researchers in Brazil at IPAM. I mean, they've shown that in deforested areas in Mato Grosso, soybean yields are down 30% from areas where there's standing forest because of the cooling benefits and water regulation benefits that forests provide. I mean, these are numbers, 30% decrease in crop production. I mean, that means something for the agricultural sector. In Kalimantan, TNC is showing that in deforested areas, the agriculture labor force, the health of the agriculture labor force is directly affected. 8% increases in mortality rates, 30% decreases in cognitive capacities of agricultural workers. I mean, these are the kind of numbers that I think we need to be getting out there. And you know, this means something, so that it's actually our colleagues, our agricultural colleagues at FAO, who are saying forests are important for us, and they're important for food security, and they're important for zero hunger. And I think that if that can be translated into this NDCs, where it's nationally owned. I mean, because this varies, you know, I gave an example from Brazil and Indonesia, but of course, dryland forests have totally different dynamics, and trees on farms have different dynamics. But if this kind of information, knowledge, can be somehow translated into enhanced NDCs, I think then we are starting to move towards forests having the real value that we all know they do. But that's not everybody does. And I think that's where we really need to move collectively.
Yeah, and perhaps bringing the big actors into the table that are really, investing in development and aligning with this is what is still missing, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, very interesting. I think we are being tackled in the international perspective, but now we have 3 speakers that know much better the national perspective, and I think we would like to see, how this international perspective matches with this emerging knowledge and experience that is emanating from countries, and what the challenges, what the opportunities, and what is being learned in this context. So we have Johannes. Johannes, you've been supporting and working with several countries on the Folu sector. Indeed, on the Folu sector. So dealing with agriculture and Folu together, and you have been working on trying to support them or sit and reflect with them on how to build the pathways. And the question is how we can ensure that those national pathways which are emerging, partially coming from the capacity that was created from RED+ and the information which is being collected, how they can match the international cooperation. How we can ensure that the international governance and cooperation really now matches what the countries need, which they know much better today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, first of all, for having me and for the question, Maria. It's very interesting. So, indeed, I work with in-country research teams in a range of countries, mainly in developing countries and emerging economies, to build low greenhouse gas development pathways. So and there we know that to meet global targets of mitigation, adaptation, food security, poverty, and so on, we need a transformation of the food and land use system. We know that we need the adequate international enabling conditions for this. We also know I can also observe that in my work, that these conditions are not in place today. We see that like the country teams that I work with hold back on the ambition. For other reasons too, but also because of kind of the assumptions they're able to make, or the assumptions they're not able to make on the international conditions. So clearly there is a need for enhanced international cooperation, and I think just as you say, Maria, I can only agree. Like really, the main message I see here is that we really need to find a way of ensuring that the international cooperation is needs-based in a way, that we really build upon the needs that we identify in countries. So this is at once great, but very hard to operationalize. So how? And I guess the question that I've worked a bit around with my colleagues is how to identify the country needs for international cooperation, and how to translate this in something that's meaningful for key players in international cooperation on the Folu sector. So we've done a bit of a proof of concept on this together with partners in Brazil, Colombia, India, Indonesia, and Senegal. So I will talk a little bit about this, and then also point to some next steps. Based on the long-term pathways and the kind of the general expertise of our partners in these 5 countries, we identified 5 transformations that are key in each country. Improved governance of land use and land ownership, restoration of degraded lands, diversified landscapes, or more diversified landscapes with agroecology and agroforestry and silvipasture, for instance. There is a question around, enhancing yields through agroecological or sustainable practices, and also improved agricultural supply chains to address losses and so on. based on these common transformations that we identified, we also then sat down to identify what are the kind of the needs in terms of international cooperation that we can identify that the countries would need to implement these transformations. So as I say, I mean, this is more of a proof of concept than anything that goes into much detail. But just to say here that I mean, clearly in terms of finance, we see that there is a question of quantity, of course, but also of quality in a way that, like, we really have to be careful about the types of finance that are available to farmers and foresters. And also, one thing that was highlighted was that, I mean, finance is one thing, and it's very important, but it's also important to look at what are the kind of enabling conditions for finance to actually be effective. So this can be, I mean, this could be in terms of national policy. I think RED is a perfect case in hand there. Could also be in terms of other kind of international conditions around, you know, if we have finance going in one direction but trade agreements going in another, clearly that's not very conducive for the results that we want. We also, and so finance was the main question, but also just to point here that also in terms of trade, there was, I mean, some of our partners in Brazil and Indonesia, for instance, pointed to the kind of the need to coordinate around standard setting, around deforestation-free products, and I mean that's also been a topic here at COP. So I think that's also important to keep in mind, and also of course in terms of capacity or knowledge sharing around. I mean, our Brazilian colleagues highlighted that basically how do you put in place a land use reform that leads to an effective governance of the land use sector? That's something, I mean, clearly there you have to be careful about. There are many differences between countries. So I mean, there are limits to what you can draw, but I think still, you know, that was something that they really highlighted as where knowledge sharing would be interesting. So very quickly then on some next steps, because this was, yeah, I've emphasized it before, this was a bit of a proof of concept that we wanted to explore, but I think going forward, I think to have more kind of in-depth messages or more in-depth insights about what is the international cooperation that the countries need, we need to go deeper and look into not only the key transformations, but also into the policies that the countries that's needed at the national level to propel these transformations. I think then we'll be able to identify more in-depth kind of like, okay, around finance, what's really the international enabling environment around finance that the countries need. So yeah, and we've started working a bit on that also with Maria in the NDC aspects project, but not final enough to present that here, sadly. But yeah, I think that's one way forward. I think more of this is needed, and I think focus on policies will kind of provide a way forward. And also just to say that I see a lot of discussions here at COP28 around I mean, we have the FAST partnership, the UN is launching a food systems coordination hub. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on where there is an opportunity to feed in on these insights. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you, Johannes. I think it's also quite interesting to see that the countries are starting to think in a more integrated, holistic manner in the context of the NDCs. And sooner than later, many countries will also think in terms of more integrated mitigation and adaptation for the land use sector, which I think is, we may see that in the next iteration of NDCs, very, very likely. So I think it's important. I think you point on how to make sure that the support sorts of is tailored. I guess one of the things that I will also sort of drop for the next two speakers that are suffering from that in their countries is, I mean, how far we need to go to tailor support that may prevent that this support is not something that can be benefiting different country circumstances. I think that's one of the issues. Sometimes we have programs that are too tailored in certain direction that may not cover the diversity of needs of different countries, even in the same region. So having said that, I mean, in Colombia, you know, Colombia is a very complex country. but at the same time is a very advanced country on reflecting about all these issues. So, I mean, what are the challenges that you see today in the context of what is being said here, and what will be your proposals to improve in a way that Colombia can feel that is better supported, that can accelerate things, while recognizing that there are complexities that are unique to Colombia?
Okay, it's a really hard question. I think in the framework of this convention and also all the mechanisms related with RED Plus, many of our donors is looking for a lot of things that we have to carry out. So I think we have a lot of burdens, and I feel we have new burdens that overpass our capacities. Now, I think our global system have to go beyond the current value that our donors are giving to our results. I mean, we have more than emission reductions. We have more than one ecosystem service related with carbon capture. We are doing a lot of things that are really valuable for our global system, like the preservation of our basins, guaranteeing our water security. Also, we are contributing with food for the humanity. Also, we have indigenous people and also local communities like Afro-Colombian people that they are making a good job preserving all of our natural resources. But all of our donors is just paying for carbon. They have to pay for more because we are resolving the needs of the North. And also, we are addressing our needs. That is true. But the point here is, if we have more money available to resolve our needs, also we are solving the needs of the North, of the big emitters of our global system. Our Folu sector and also our fossil fuel sector represent the vast section of the pie of our emissions. But currently, our president has the will to cut all our emissions, to cut all explorations for charcoal and also for petroleum, for oil. But also, we are promoting new programs enhancing the capacities that the Amazon has to control the effects of climate change for all the globe. Also, we have available more than 10 millions of hectares where restoration could be applicable. Restoration for increase our biodiversity, but also to provide enough food for our region. I mean, all South America and also the Caribbean and Central America. And also we are exporting food for other countries beyond our continent. Also, we are conserving all these areas where the water is crucial. We have high mountain ecosystems that are key for our planet. However, we are paying with losses and damages over our cryosphere, in our paramos or moorlands, and also we are paying with a lot of droughts. I think this system has to change. Looking the way for our donors to become investors. Investors looking for resolve the necessities, the needs that they have, but also promoting and recognizing all the values that we are giving for the humanity. I think we have to address a lot of things. We have to address some problems on our domestic affairs, like something like security, for example, poverty, but we need the help of our investors. I mean, REDD+ has to go beyond the forest, have to be in touch with the humans that are living in that forest, but also in the borders of the forest with other ecosystems like mangroves, like paramos, like rivers and other wetlands that are available to contain the emissions, our emissions, and also the compensation of emissions of the north. That is all.
Yeah, I think you said something which it is, I think, a key word, which is attracting investments, but the right ones. Right. So I guess we have to overcome this simplistic wording of paying for, but rather attracting investments to transform the sector, but under the governance of the country, under the aspirational goals of the country. So I think that's a step forward. We need to promote. But I also want to make a point on Colombia, because I think you are one of the first countries that is been developing a very sophisticated early warning systems for forests, which links to adaptation. And now early warning systems are all over the place, COP28. So that's I think a merit, because you're being very visionary of that was needed. And now, today we're talking about that, but Colombia was talking about that already 10 years ago. Okay, Indonesia. Indonesia is a country that has a very long history on forest governance. Perhaps one of the largest histories on forest governance on the earth. And the reason is that it's very complex. So you've been trying things like from fiscal transfers, the moratorium on palm oil, now the recent actions to put in order how the carbon market will be leveraged in the context of the domestic contributions to the ambition of Indonesia and the NDC. I think you've been one of the first ones to say openly that. So what are the challenges that you're facing today? How you foresee that to progress in Indonesia? How you see the roles of different financial means, combined with the regulation, which you are very, very experienced on that, despite that you have very complex territory.
Thank you. It is my privilege and great pleasure to welcome you and in this discussion. And I'm here representing Mrs. Laxmi Dewanti as my DG, who cannot attend for this discussion. Indonesia commitment to contribute to the global temperature goal and under the Paris Agreement, and it's been reflected in its NDC 2030, and also we already submitted the long-term strategy for low carbon and climate resilience 2050. Yeah. With Folu to reach net sink in 2030, nearly 97.2% of the NDC targets come from Folu sector and energy. And the enhanced NDC has increased the national target on emission reduction from 29% to 31.9% unconditionally. And among this target, forestry and land use contribute 17.4%. A roadmap has been developed for implementing the NDC with 6 main strategies to reduce emission from Folu. First, improvement of forest resources management. We established the FMU, Forest Management Unit. And secondly, strengthening sustainable practice in production forest management. Third, reduction of dependency to natural forests. And fourth, reduction of pressure on natural forests in the meeting the need agricultural development by optimizing spatial planning, the use of unproductive land. And 5, conservation and enhancement of forest carbon stock through ecosystem restoration, rehabilitation of degraded land, and moratorium of new permit on peatland. And last, acceleration of adoption of low carbon technology. And REDD+ play a strategic role in achieving Indonesia's NDC target from this sector. And in Indonesia, we already achieved the result-based payment, and we have a success story of REDD+, result-based payment from Green Climate Fund program with a national pilot, with emission reduction of 20.2 million tons CO2 equivalent, and we received the 103.7 million US dollar, and it was from 2014 until the year of 2014 until 2016 performance result, and is currently in preparation for transfer to provinces throughout Indonesia with the contribution approach to emission national reduction. And also, secondly, Indonesia also success in reducing GHG emission by reducing emission in REDD+ in the year of 2016 and 2017 amount 11.2 million tons CO2 equivalent with result-based contribution from Norwegian government, and we receive 56 million US dollar, and by jurisdictionally we also have result-based payment from Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, Carbon Fund in East Kalimantan Province, and we with the allocation of grant allocation, and also we will prepare the amount of 110 million US dollar to achieve emission reduction 22 million tons of CO2 equivalent in the year of 2019 until 2024 period. And under the Cancun Agreement, as stated in earlier section, we are developing country aims to implement REDD+ need to develop the following elements: national strategy, firstly, or we call action plan, forest reference emission level or FRL, and robust and transparent national forest monitoring system for the monitoring and reporting REDD+ activities, and a system for providing information on how safeguards are addressed and respected. We call a system information of safeguard. And Indonesia already has developed REDD+ architecture consisting of the above 4 elements: national strategy, FRL, and NFMS, and also a safeguard. And we also build the financing and registry system, national registry system, as well as REDD+ institution and the governance. And despite REDD+ huge potential in Indonesia, its implementation is challenging institutionally and methodologically. Indonesia has addressed this challenge, including through establishment of Indonesia Environment Fund, EAF, putting into effect regulatory measures with support REDD+ implementation and continuous improvement of methodological infrastructure such as NFMS, MRV system, national registry system, safeguard information system, and others. And non-technical challenges relate to institutional arrangement and capacity at subnational or we in our country provinces and different requirement from different sources of REDD+ finance. I think that's all.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important to see how you are building pieces that obviously are going to be the basis of your transparency architecture for the whole Paris Agreement. So the sector is quite advanced in that regard. And now you are looking for differentiation of sources of finance, including probably markets, but not all only.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good example on how countries are evolving. With this, we already have got all the speakers. I mean, summarizing what is being said is extremely difficult. But I will summarize just with 2 points. First point is that REDD+ was worth, because without REDD+, probably we won't be in the situation now to provide a much better basis in the context of the NDC for the countries to engage with the forest sector and extending to other land uses. So I think that's fundamental, and we have to recognize that. I think the other message is don't burden more than we already have burdened countries, but rather make their lives easier and help them to integrate the Folu sector into the NDC, taking into account the national circumstances. And my final conclusion is, I think now we have the right space for forest and land use sector to evolve in the context of the Paris Agreement, but we need to make sure that the connections with other conventions, other initiatives that go beyond mitigation are properly done. And that within the Convention of Climate Change, we connect adaptation and mitigation in the land use sector. So I think this is my conclusion for the panel. You want another conclusion?
No. I want to add one sentence on things that I'm hearing here a lot.
I allowed you because it's you, eh?
I know. And I hear a lot about the NDCs and how important it will be that the next NDCs are better. And there's a lot of sense of urgency always during the COP. But the importance to realize is the NDCs are due in the first quarter of 2025. So if we meet again at COP29, the NDCs should already be in draft status and up for approval and for final proofreading. So it's the next year where if you're pushing this from inside the country, outside the country, NGO, in the forest sector, or wherever, it's the next year we have to push it. And it will be very, very difficult for countries to do this because there's lots of uncertainties and it's a major accomplishment.
They are starting. They will have other cycles as well. What they need is to keep the right direction, I think. So, but thank you for reminding us that this next year is the next cycle of iteration. I would like to say that this has been a collective effort as the Global Stocktake. And as Amy was saying, it was long discussions in between colleagues, José Carlos Fernández from FAO, Lucio Santos, Serena Fortuna, and Gaby Alonso. And they were all coming from different perspectives as well, because sometimes in the past they were countries and they were here as negotiators. Now they are supporting countries. And we have been trying to pull together all the experience that we gained in the last 20 years. And you have been adding to that. So thank you very much for this. And with this, I close the pavilion program of the Spanish.
And the COP, that's right.
And I want to thank the team here because they are being really patient with me because I am a disaster organizing events. Okay, see you.